This is the 401k Fridays podcast, and I'm your host, Rick Unser. Now here we go with this week's episode. At least once a year, I think it makes sense to check in on what our friends at the state-run retirement plans are up to. Today, I'm happy to have Katie Selenski, the Executive Director of CalSavers, the California State Retirement Plan, and Dylan Giambatista with the new Vermont or Green Mountain Secure Retirement Plan. Katie shares some encouraging data on what they're seeing thus far from CalSavers, and Dylan shares the unique approach Vermont took to creating their retirement plan. I learned a lot. Hopefully you do as well. Before we get started, if you're not already on our email list, make sure you take care of that today. We'll be announcing our next webinar on pooled employer plans very shortly. Go to 401kfridays.com/subscribe, and you can take care of that, as well as subscribe to the podcast if for some reason you haven't done that already as well. That's it. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Katie and Dylan. Katie, Dylan, thank you for taking the time to join me. A lot going on in the world of state-run retirement plans, so looking forward to hearing from both of you what's going on in your respective states. So thanks for being here.
Great to be here. Thanks, Rick.
Thanks, Rick.
So just from a quick introduction standpoint, Katie, why don't you go first, and then Dylan, I'll have you jump in, and then we'll kick it off.
Sure. Thanks, Rick. Hey, everyone. I'm Katie Selenski. I'm the Executive Director of the CalSavers Retirement Savings Board.
And I'm Dylan Giambatista. I'm the Director of Outreach and Financial Literacy for the Vermont State Treasurer's Office.
I love it. We've got a bi-coastal representation here, so that always helps. So I guess just by quick retrospective, Katie, I think you've probably got the longest history, or California as a state probably has the longest history of the two of you guys in the conversation here today. So maybe just start with, how did this come to be? How did California get started even wanting to offer a state plan? And how does that get you to where you are today? And then Dylan, I'll have you do the same thing.
CalSavers has been a long time in coming. It's been a long journey to get to where we are today. And Rick, I think for your longtime listeners, some of them may remember the first couple episodes I did with you. So if you want more of the detail, I think you can probably go back to those if they're still on your site. But, I've been in the role for about 4 years here, but, I came on board after the legislation was passed. Really, the beginnings go back to 2007, 2008, when then Assembly member Kevin De Leon, who, rose to become a senator and in fact the president of the Senate in California, started looking at the retirement security problem in California, looked around, saw that nearly half of working Californians are on a trajectory to retire into economic hardship. And your audience is very familiar, I think, with all those stats, so we won't go into that. But he started looking at the problem and at various solutions. At the beginning, they were looking at even, defined benefit PERS style plan for private sector workers who didn't have access at work. They looked at everything. And they consulted, the legislators consulted with experts in DC, including officials from prior presidential administrations who had tried to enact some kind of national auto IRA type program. And long story short, after a lot of work, a lot of stakeholder engagement, a lot of studying, in 2012, the legislature passed the first version of the bill that established it was then called the Secure Choice Board, and the program and the bones of it were really set up as an IRA program. But it established the board and required them to raise funds from the philanthropic sector to conduct a feasibility study to prove that the thing could float on its own without state support. And so that whole process, setting up the board beginning in 2013, raising the money, hiring the consultants, doing that study, and then kind of going back to the legislature with that study, took another 4 years. So the second version of the bill passed in the fall of 2016. So I skipped over a lot of really hard work that a lot of people did, but that was the long path there. So about an 8-year legislative path. And then I was appointed in, the winter of 2017. And we can get into it on this conversation about what we've been doing since then. But so it was a long journey.
Yeah, and I think still probably a lot more to go as well. So Dylan, what about you guys? What's been going on in Vermont? Similar path or maybe slightly different?
Yeah, a similar path in that this has been a very long-term conversation. Going back to about 2006, when our then state treasurer and deputy state treasurer, who's our current treasurer, Beth Pierce, did research in this area and did look at the various models that might be available, similar to California and what Katie just referenced. There was a lengthy conversation then. And what happened, of course, was around that time, there was an increased focus on personal finances, education that states could provide to ensure folks have adequate and secure retirement income. And the Great Recession elevated that conversation even more. But of course, with that, a lot of the resources of our office in Vermont went into promoting programs that would provide basic education, both to young Vermonters and older Vermonters. Some time went by, but the pieces of this were picked up in around 2014, when the legislature, at the recommendation of the state treasurer, formed a study committee for the purpose of evaluating establishment of some form of public retirement system. And in Vermont, a little bit different from California, we're quite small, and we have what I would call a small business economy that really is the backbone of our main streets. And so we have many small businesses, employees 50 or fewer, oftentimes just several. And so the committee set about its work focusing in on that and trying to understand what the lay of the land was. We found great support from local organizations like AARP Vermont, and some partnerships were formed that allowed us to get some data, develop that. And so what happened was, over a period of a couple of years, Vermont looked at the various models available, including some of the exciting work with auto IRAs and other pieces. And in 2017, at the recommendation of that committee, the legislature passed a bill which was enacted into law to actually create a plan based on a MEP structure. So a little bit different. And we can talk about some of the reasons why, but it's representative of a couple conversations in our state that were going on at the time. We had a pretty robust discussion about mandated healthcare in the state and single payer healthcare that encountered some resistance for various reasons. And additionally, around that same time, we also were having a lot of conversations about education as it relates to state mandates and local control. New England is famous for its town meetings, local control. And so in the course of this, that all sort of factored into our decisions, the culture of local traditions and the way that people like to have control. Well, there's some similarities with our small business ecosystem. So the MEP structure is what the General Assembly adopted. We'll talk a little bit more about this, but we had hoped originally that the plan would be implemented in 2018, and we're on track to do so. What happened was there were a couple of rules issued by the U.S. Department of Labor, and we had to wait to get some clarity. So we updated our partners in the General Assembly and elsewhere. And recently, we got the green light as some of those rules were clarified. And so over the last year and heading into 2021 now, we'll be working to implement our plan and roll it out.
No, that's a great update. And please correct me if I'm wrong here. I think you're the only state plan to be going down the MEP path, or are there others that just maybe are not quite as far along as you?
Yeah, so Massachusetts has a plan, I believe it's for nonprofits, that's structured similarly, but that's a different market share. The way that the Vermont plan has been structured, it would be available to any Vermont business, 50 or fewer employees, that does not currently offer a retirement plan. So that could be a nonprofit, it could be a for-profit. So a little bit different. So our structure is certainly a Vermont unique structure. And we can talk a little bit about those reasons here as we get going.
Yeah, so I'd love to just kind of dig into that, because I think, already some similarities and differences there between what California's done and what you're doing, where, Katie, I know from a mandate standpoint, you're looking at 100 employees with 100 or more was kind of your first cut in terms of who should be starting in the CalSavers program. So if you don't already have a plan, kind of like Dylan was saying, like, hey, if you're not already sponsoring a 401k or a 403b or some other type of qualified retirement plan, and you have 100 or more employers, that's kind of where CalSavers starts at least from a mandate standpoint. Am I thinking about that right?
Yeah, you are. The first deadline was last September, and that was for the employers with more than 100 employees. So that's exactly right. Of course, we roll out over the next couple of years too. So the next deadline is for employers with more than 50. That's coming up in 4 months, and then the last deadline we go all the way down to 5 or more employees. That's in a year and a half. So yeah, but that mandate, different states are different, right? And I think our legislature just felt that having an employer mandate was really an important, powerful policy lever that we had here to drive adoption and to kind of make the economics work out so that there would be enough growth to attract providers and to really move the needle. So that was one of the priorities for California.
And before I toss this back to Dylan, what do you feel for California were some of the drivers behind going down the path of an IRA versus anything else that might have been out there in the marketplace?
Yeah, I think simplicity was a key goal and principle that the designers had in mind when they were writing the statute, both in-state folks and the kind of expert advisors. So, we didn't want to have to reinvent the wheel. An IRA has existed for a long, long time. We know how they work. We know that for our particular population, again, remember, so we're talking about 8 million California workers who don't have access at work. That's our target population here. Their median income is $25,000 a year. So relatively low income, really many, many, many first-time savers. For some of these folks, first time having a bank account. So it was really important that it be, a simple product, but also allow for flexibility. And, it's sort of sacrilegious in the retirement investing world to say this, but allow access to contributions, right? So the Roth IRA structure was, I think, really, really important for the board to allow folks, for better or worse, to have access to their contributions tax and penalty free. But for the most part, wanted to keep it simple, wanted to use an existing proven model, didn't want to reinvent the wheel. And so the IRA really works.
I like it. All right, Dylan. So I guess a couple compare contrasts. First off, is there a mandate in Vermont, meaning that if you don't have a retirement plan, do you need to join your state plan at a certain period of time? And then just to piggyback on some of Katie's thoughts about the IRA, would love to get your thoughts on, what led you down the path of the MEP versus, the Roth IRA path that Katie described.
Yeah, and I think Katie said it well, that each state is different and so has a set of policy options that they're considering in design. In Vermont, I alluded to this, we have a robust discussion about mandates, and it often has to do with state control and local control. There is no county government. And the reason I bring this up is because it just speaks to some of the power dynamics that exist within the state and some of the practical considerations that politicians here have to make when they're making these types of policy decisions. So the state at this time, 2016, 2017, looked at this and said, well, let's not go with a mandated approach. And in fact, our state treasurer, who's an advocate for retirement policy in general and wants to see everyone have adequate and reliable income in retirement, she looked at it and said, we think we can do this with the MEP structure. And they identified a series of goals similar to California that they wanted to achieve. And it included things like simplicity, affordability, ease of access, trustworthy oversight, protection from exploitation, portability, choice. And so within this, I think that the MEP structure appealed both to the board members who were studying this and to lawmakers because it's structured like a 401k plan. I mean, that's, people know there's some bells and whistles with it. There are some more design considerations available than an auto IRA. You can do things like Roth contributions. There's all sorts of optionalities. And in fact, recently, as we've been working on implementing this with our 316 vendor and looking at other things, I think just the big emphasis on this is providing a secure product, not to say others aren't, but this was just a design consideration that we looked at and something that we felt would give employers maximum flexibility. So they can do things in some of the design models that we're going through. They could choose from a standard plan offering, which would provide a preset menu of items that would be available to them, or they could go and do a custom plan. There's safe harbor contributions and things that can be done through it. So it gets very complex quickly. And I know the audience of this probably has some knowledge in this field, probably more than I do, I bet. But Vermont's approach was very much trying to focus on the needs of the employers, because for our approach, because it's not mandated, the key is to entice the employers in. Once we get them in, then the employees can access the savings plan. And, with about 45% of our small business economy not having access to this type of plan currently through an employer, it's very important to create something that the employers want to be part of. And the real question for us is going to be implementation. How do we get people to do it? How do we entice them to take part? And these are questions that are quite different from a mandated structure such as other states. So I think a lot of people will be looking to us to see how we do it. And it might just be that our scale, because it's so hyper local and everyone knows everyone here, it might be an advantage, but there's a lot yet to learn about our approach. So we can talk more about that as we go here.
Yeah. And just to make sure I'm also following as we go through this. So if I'm thinking about this, a MEP, multiple employer plan, using that 401k structure. So to me, that means, all right, I think you said it, safe harbor. So I can offer a match. I could do potentially a profit sharing. Does that also come with things like loans and hardship distributions and potentially some of the maybe not so fun things like discrimination testing and other, like is all of that sort of, what I would think about in a 401k setting or in a MEP setting if I wasn't part of a state plan? Pretty much anything I can think of in that ecosystem, does that also translate into your ecosystem as setting the state plan up as a multiple employer plan?
Yeah, in general, I would say yes. And of course, with that, I mean, the big policy question for members of the board overseeing the plan and for the folks who enacted this is how do you offer all these bells and whistles in balance with the public good of providing an option for retirement? And this is what I think states increasingly are going to be grappling with is we recognize there is a need. This is one way to do it. And how do you balance it with all the options an employer might want to provide? So it's an interesting question of, I think, providing a product that is geared toward retirement savings while also having some of the flexibility that you would find in a 401k structure. All of the types of options that you have outlined are things that we're considering in plan design as we go about offering a standard plan, which would be the safe harbor model, or a customized plan where the employer could choose all sorts of other options within it. So it's trying to strike the balance between ease of use for the businesses who maybe don't want to deal with as much administratively burdensome work and providing a real customized experience for those employers who want to do things like profit share and other items. So that's the balance we're trying to strike in Vermont right now.
No, super helpful. Katie, let me come back to you for a minute. You talked about how in California, there's 9 million citizens, I guess, right? 9 million residents. What's the right word there?
Well, it's 8 million workers that don't have access to a plan at work. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you. I was trying to come up with the right word there.
Yeah.
The plan's live. You guys have kind of gone through the first launch, the first, portion of the mandate kind of targeting those employers that are, have over 100 employees and don't have a retirement plan at work. So how's that going? What's the data say? I'm sure you've got some numbers there. So I'd love to kind of hear kind of the progress and uptake and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Rick, this is so fun to finally be at this point with you. I think the first couple conversations we had, first time we were pre-launch, second time we were maybe mid-pilot, I can't remember. But so it's just a thrill, I have to say. And Dylan, you have a lot to look forward to once you guys are at this point. It's a thrill to watch it grow and come to life. So yeah, happy to report that we have, by the time this podcast goes live, I think we'll probably have just hit 300,000 enrollments.
Wow.
Which is just fantastic. We're just shy of that as we record today, of which 115,000 are funded accounts as of today. So we have the difference there being very recently enrolled accounts where the employers have not yet gotten to the first payroll cycle. So, which we can talk more about, Rick, in a few minutes. But so, 300,000 enrollments, 115,000 funded accounts. Our participation rate is 71% so far, all told. which we're just absolutely thrilled about because, if you think, like, as I said a few minutes ago, the median income is $25,000 a year. Our participants are not getting any kind of, financial incentive, aside from maybe some of them qualify for the federal savers credit, which is modest. Unlike what you're going to have in your MEP, right? We don't have any possibility for employer match. We have no government match. So considering 25, low income population, 71% of them are staying in the program and figuring out how to save 5-6% of their pay just because we nudged them into it. So it's just, we're so proud of that. On average, folks are saving about $120 a month, which, small, but it's going to add up. It's going to add up over time if you stick with it for, 40 years. And, a couple of other numbers just to throw out while I'm on a roll here. We have automatic escalation built into our design. So the default is 5%. You start at 5%, and then you auto escalate 1 point a year up until you get to 8. So we have 2 years of data on the effect of the auto escalation, and I'm so excited to report we just got the second year data a couple of days ago. In 2020, we had a 98% acceptance rate among active savers on that first year of auto. So 98% of them went from 5 to 6 and just kept it and stuck with it, which we were just thrilled about. This month, this year, about a month ago, on the second annual round, 96% of our active participants stuck with the auto escalation, which, we were worried that it was going to be much lower, just in general, but also because of COVID and other things. So just, absolutely thrilled at that result. And I think it speaks to the power of nudge theory and, auto features in general. So it's certainly, I'm a big supporter of those policy features. A few people even went up, changed when we nudged them about it, when we notified them about the auto escalation, they said, oh, well, now that you mentioned it, I'm going to go even higher than the one. So those are a few numbers that we like to throw out. Let's see, coming up on 9,500 registered employers. So, the point is, we're doing this. 300,000 enrolled workers who wouldn't have been doing this otherwise. It's just, it's really gratifying to see. And of course, we can get into all kinds of other interesting discussion about COVID and challenges and highlights. But, for the most part, we're, really excited to be at this point and still onboarding every single day. Our team, including our business partners at a census, our record keeper, we work hard every day to onboard all these employers. It takes a few months to get them from beginning registration all the way through to payroll facilitation. But it's just wonderful to see these accounts coming to life and to see people who are, basically previously disenfranchised saving for their futures.
No, that's great. And some really good statistics. I think some of the early concerns with a lot of the state plans was going to be the opt-out rates and the stick rates. And so that certainly sounds very encouraging and probably a lot better than I think some of maybe the initial, let's call them critics, I guess, it kind of forecasted. So I think that's great. Now that you're into this, what are you hearing from employers? What's been the reaction? I guess, with this first wave of mandate with the employers with 100 employees or more, are they excited to have a solution? Are they annoyed that they have to do this? Are they like, what's the temperature been on that side, and how have some of those conversations gone? I'm sure there's been some great ones, but I'm sure there's also been maybe some challenging ones.
That is very true. Yeah, we've heard it all pretty much at this point. We've heard it all. For the most part, I would say the general refrain is, this was a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. So the expectation, some employers, there's been pent up demand from some employers, and I think they tend to be on the smaller end of the spectrum. So in a second, I'll rattle off a couple numbers about wave 1, 2, and 3 and where they fall. But, for the first wave, so for those with more than 100 employees who are really in mandate zone right now, and, we're following up, they're approaching enforcement phase here. It's a mix. Some of them say, I always wanted to do this, but I just, it was for one reason or another, either the fiduciary liability or the cost, or the just I'm wearing every single hat in my shop and I just can't figure it out on my own. I never made time. Sure, this is a good solution. I kind of always wanted to do this. Some just I think are ideologically opposed to the M word, the mandate word, government mandates. And then we have a group that are, just really enthusiastic, right? So those are the general three buckets. As we kind of proceed through our rollout towards these smaller and smaller employers, though, the enthusiasm is increasing pretty dramatically. So one stat I'll throw out. So of the employers that we have registered right now, and just by way of reminder, all mandated employers, so all employers in the state with 5 or more employees who don't offer a plan already, they can join at any time, right? That we were open for them in July 2019. So many of them are in the door. So the thing that's really telling to me is that, right, as of today, 11% of our currently registered employers are wave 2, meaning their deadline is in 4 months. And actually 69% of our currently registered employers are wave 3. So their deadline is in a year and a half. So that, that tells me that there's, quite a lot of demand there on the smaller end of the market. The one thing that is relevant here is COVID. So we certainly didn't expect a global pandemic to descend upon us right when we were, approaching our deadline. We did actually change our deadline. The original deadline for wave 1 was June 30th, 2020, excuse me. And we pushed that back by a quarter for obvious reasons. So we continued to have conversations every day with, wave 1 employers who, registered and, had to basically take a pause because they're shuttered right now, or whose payrolls have really shrunk and they're still facilitating, but it's for a much, much smaller set. And we're trying to be as sensitive as we can possibly be there for those guys. But, for the most part, it's, we're really happy to hear that, people think it's easier once they get through their first payroll cycle, which is, requiring some degree of support for the most part. Our onboarding team at a census, excellent customer service team. On average, they're supporting employers through that first payroll cycle on the phone or on Zoom. And once they get beyond that, folks are kind of consistently saying, oh, this is pretty easy.
Well, Dylan, so as you hear some of those numbers, obviously, as you mentioned, the state of Vermont is smaller than the state of California. If you were to try to just, I guess maybe think about your addressable audience, right? I think, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, instead of it being, 8 million residents that don't have access to a plan at work, I think you said about 45% of your state doesn't have access to, a 401k or other qualified plan. So I guess if you think about how many people does that represent? And as you are thinking about your launch, or as you're thinking about year 1, year 2, year 3 milestones, what would get you as happy as Katie to talk about your results and really kind of look out and go, wow, this hit the mark?
Yeah, well, I would just say that as a financial literacy proponent who's out there cheering for this stuff every day, the work that Katie and her team is doing is really incredible. When I hear that there are 300,000 enrolled individuals, 115,000 funded, that's amazing because, first of all, the whole population of Vermont is a little north of 600,000, under 700,000. So she's already enrolled half of our state, essentially. That's amazing, and it's great for the country and for our shared goal of retirement security. I would point out that Vermont is the west coast of New England, for what it's worth. So we hope that we have similar luck for our friends on the west coast with this. I think what we're going to be looking at, we've seen research that shows there's somewhere between 105,000, 115,000 workers who currently lack access to an employer-sponsored plan. Now, in the scale of a state of 600, 650,000, that's actually a lot of people. And so one of the things that we're thinking about is what is coming down the road for Vermont. We're a rapidly aging state. We're soon going to be the oldest in the nation. So acting on retirement security really has some urgency. And I think that's part of the policy rationale why policymakers sought this. If you can get folks saving, you know that you're going to reduce pressures on the later years when they might need some of the government services that are available to older Americans. And so we've tried to think holistically about that. When I think about how we define success, it's can we launch this multiple employer plan in a way where we can get the employers in? They are able to easily onboard into the system, similar to what Katie said, because I think that customer service piece of getting people in is the key. Once they're in, a lot of the research coming from the auto IRA states shows that they're generally happy, particularly once the payroll cycle is done and they see the money going out. So understanding the compliance functions, making that easy and getting people bought in is our key. I remember when California launched its program, I tuned into the press release and was like, wow, look at this. This is amazing stuff. And some of the takeaways I've taken from other states on how we will define success is ensuring that we have a pilot group for that first wave of businesses to learn from them, to survey them, to ensure the customer service piece is down so that their expectations are met, so that they don't have concerns longer term. And so we're going to be doing a pilot with a small test group. So we'll be focusing in on that. And then as we scale up with it, we'll be defining success as how can we make the rounds to get people in, because we have no mandate. So we got to do a lot of retail on the ground work to spread the word about this. Now, the nice thing about a small state, again, is basically everyone knows everyone. And I can name every county and every town in the state pretty quick. So we have that going for us. We also have the advantage of a small business ecosystem where with the social capital of knowing one another, we can spread word through trade associations, through business groups, and also through, of course, we'll do the traditional earned and mass media to try to spread the word. But right now, I think that our goal is to develop a program for that pilot group that really addresses their needs. And I think if we build it, they will come. That's our hope. And so we're going to be working with our partners to spread the word. I don't have a number to throw out there, but I'll say this. If we can make a dent of any size, as states are doing, we're contributing to the empowerment of thousands and thousands of Americans who previously lacked access to adequate and secure income in retirement. And we know that the retirement crisis is real. And I think we also know, and states are being nimble to address this, that as employee preferences change, as they expect portable benefits, as they look for a system that moves with them, the role of these state plans is going to become even more important, just as a private plan already was in the 401k space. So I think this type of innovation is really moving with the gig economy and moving where the need is. And I think it's going to, over time, pay huge dividends in public good. And that's something that everyone can, I think, support. The other thing is this, that, in Vermont, we said right off the bat, we want to create a program that is additive and not duplicating some of the plans that are already available to folks. So we don't view competition either in the MEP space or in another retirement sector as a problem. It's all about ensuring people can access these plans, that once they're there, they can save the dollars. So making it really, really easy for the user and ensuring good customer service, that's what it's all about. So I don't consider this a game of competition. It's a game of ensuring people get the need met. That's really what we're talking about.
No, and that's a great transition there because that was one of my things that I wanted to pose to both of you. And Katie, I think you and I have talked about this on prior episodes, where I think the attitude has been from you and other state plan sponsors is, we're not in competition with the traditional 401k marketplace, or we're not in competition with multiple employer plan providers, or now as of January 1st, the new pooled employer plans are sort of coming online at this point. So Katie, maybe I'll start with you. Is that still kind of your feeling, and that there's not that competition? It's more of a kind of a sense of collegiality, or are you running into some people that maybe don't have that viewpoint as you're enrolling more employers and employees in the state retirement plan?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I really enjoy talking about this. Actually, from our perspective, it's absolutely not competitive. We we're mission driven. We want to improve access and coverage, for folks so that we can all, as a society be on a path to retirement security. So whether that's through, an employer-sponsored 401k or through folks doing it on their own, through CalSavers, through the Vermont MEP, through a new PEP that's, new kid on the block, or whatever the Biden administration might dream up. From our perspective, most of these things are really complementary. And I repeat this a lot with our board that, our goal is we're measuring our success by how much we increase coverage or how much coverage increases. So we do expect that our mandate will spur some degree of private market innovation, both on product and marketing. And we've already kind of anecdotally seen evidence of that with the emergence of more and more kind of 401k in a box for small business plans out of, I won't name names, but, multiple providers out there. It's really cool to see that. I think that's going to meet the needs for a whole big chunk of the small business space, which is awesome. I don't think it's a point of contention to say that, 401ks are objectively better than a Roth IRA, right? They allow for more contributions. They allow for employer match. So to the extent that employers can adopt those, that's wonderful. We do, for better or worse, we do think that there's probably always going to be a need for our option here for the smallest of the small businesses that just, or for just, the small, the thinnest profit margins, right? Where employers, for whatever reason can't seem to adopt their own plan. So that's why we're here. But absolutely complementary efforts. Really very curious to see how the PEPs roll out. Really excited to see how Dylan and his colleagues, how this, open MEP works out on the state sponsored level. I think that's great to have another, new model out there. But, I will say one other thing on this, Rick. We have this anecdotal evidence so far that our mandates are inspiring innovation and more uptake. We are actually beginning some research partnerships with research organizations in DC to try to get at that quantitatively and really measure the effect and see if, in fact, there is sort of a measurable effect of more new plan formations in the states where we have these mandates.
So, Dylan, I want to come over to you real quickly because from California, CalSavers, Katie's perspective, I think you said it perfectly. Hey, a Roth IRA is not really on a level playing field competing, quote unquote, with a 401k plan or 403b plan. Now, in Vermont, I think you do have a little bit more of a quote unquote level playing field against some of the folks that are probably in the business of offering retirement plans and whether it be third-party administrators or record keepers or advisors. So I don't know. How have those conversations gone with people that are, in that business in your state? Because I get it. I understand the goal. I understand the mission, but I also feel like for people that are saying, hey, well, I have a 401k plan. This sounds like it might be a little more efficient or might cost me less. Maybe I'm going to hitch my wagon with the state and, leave these folks behind. I don't know. Like I said, I hear the words coming out of your mouth, but I'm just curious in terms of what the reaction's been and maybe how those conversations have been a little different than maybe some of the conversations that Katie and her team have had on the CalSavers side.
In the policy and program design, a lot of the controversy, I would say, was taken off the table when Vermont determined it would not be a mandated program. Now that has pros and cons, right? It requires a different type of lift, and achieving the economies of scale that you get with a mandated program might take more time for obvious reasons. But in terms of the industry reception to it, when the plan was working through both the study committee process and later through the legislative process, if you take the mandate off the table, in our case, we didn't encounter the resistance. There was tripartisan support. In Vermont, we actually have 3 major political parties. And so it did not encounter resistance when it moved through the legislative process. But additionally, it says right there in the statute that it's additive and not there to step in on the heels of anyone else who's providing services in this sector. So for a business that already has a plan, they actually would not be eligible under the definition of the law. So there's that piece of it. I think longer term, we're going to be assessing implementation and looking to our peers in other states. And again, I would just say, the states that go first, the proof is really in the pudding here. They have achieved something incredible, that they are expanding access, that people are in, that many of them are already saving, that there's auto escalation and features that allow it to grow over time to meet the need. And so I think that we'll be looking to other states as well as we move forward, and trying to assess whatever metrics we pull off of this to understand what impact we're having. There's a lot of great national research that's now happening. And so it sounds great that Katie and others are contributing to that in the programs that are already stood up. And so we're also going to be looking to the best practices that come out of this. What I will say is this, is that, our goal is to enhance retirement security. So as we work through this process, it's really going to be being responsive to the needs of our state as we talk with folks. And I think that if we can place the emphasis there on the customer service piece, if we can ensure it's a friendly program and that the goals of it are what they are and not something that's spun up out of fear or concern, I think that we'll be able to maintain that good relationship, our space in the market, and will continue to be viewed as a program that is available to fill a space, but not to take up anyone else's space.
Yeah, and that's, I think, a key point you mentioned there, that, hey, if you already have a plan, you're not eligible for the state plan. So I think in terms of any fears or any concerns, that I would imagine that sort of puts that to bed for anyone in the retirement industry in your state.
Yeah, we don't always get unanimous votes through the legislature, but we found a pretty non-controversial economic development bill to attach this to, and there weren't objections. There's always going to be questions, and I think folks have an interest in seeing that this is done right, but it was a unanimous vote, which is unusual. And so we viewed that as a sign of confidence. And for whatever reason, that appears to have been telegraphed out because we have not encountered resistance to date.
Got it. Well, and yet again, another great transition there, where I wanted to go to sort of the political side of this, because I do feel like, and both of you please chime in and correct me if you feel otherwise, I feel like as the political winds kind of move in one direction or the other, I feel like state plans or maybe have a little more of a tailwind behind them. Sometimes they've got a little more of a headwind that you're sort of trying to move into or fight against. So I don't know, am I making a bigger deal out of that than I need to, or does sort of the prevailing direction of the political winds, whether they be on a national or local level, does that impact the creation, formation, launch, et cetera, of state-run retirement plans?
I'm happy to jump in here for a second. I think, let me just say fundamentally, very sincerely, I think retirement and security is a bipartisan issue. And I think really does for real have the ability to get, these kinds of programs and efforts have the ability to get bipartisan support. Everybody knows there's a problem, right? And I think people can kind of disagree about, various solutions. But I think at this point, pretty much everybody I talk to on both sides of the aisle, acknowledges there's a problem. So that's a really good starting point. There are 13 states that have enacted a bill already, right? Various stages of getting launched, but 13 states have enacted it. Politics, I think, obviously we have a new administration in DC. We've been very gratified to see that the Biden administration during the campaign and even post-inauguration has continued to highlight, retirement security as a priority. So not that I want to try to read political tea leaves here, but I think it does, and there have been, over the last, 15, 20 years, there have been bipartisan efforts in Congress on the Hill to try to chip away at this. I think now with the Biden administration leadership, it seems like we're going to see some additional movement, Secure 2.0, maybe other substantive add-ons there. Some of your audience, Rick, may have read the news about the Biden's DOL's recent action in the litigation with CalSavers. I won't talk about that here, but that's a data point. I think if I'm kind of trying to to guess at what might happen on a national level. I think maybe it's more likely that in the next couple of years we might get some kind of national standard or national, employer requirement. Whether or not that also has a national quote program like CalSavers attached to it, I think that's probably. And again, I'm just guessing here. That's probably less likely. Which, if that's the direction it goes, in other words, a national mandate without a national government-run program, then that might actually open up more demand and more possibilities for the existing state program. So all of which is kind of a wishy-washy way to say that I think we're seeing action. I think that retirement, we have to solve this problem nationally. It's not specific to Vermont or California, right? Or any of these 13 states. And so, lots of different solutions here. And, I'm encouraged to see that, I think that we can have bipartisan solutions.
Dylan, I'm assuming you're going to chime in about tripartisan support.
So yes, we have a tripartisan General Assembly in Vermont. We even have independents, and occasionally, I'm sure others as well. But no, this really is an issue that does transcend politics to the extent that almost everyone agrees we have a challenge in this country. And you look at the surveys that go out periodically or annually about preparedness for retirement, preparedness for emergency situations where savings may be necessary, credit scores and other things. We have a personal finance challenge in this country that everyone can agree is a problem. Now, how we address it is where sometimes there is disagreement, but I would say the momentum is moving toward more solutions that fill gaps such as this. And there's always going to be that need as long as there are independent contractors, sole proprietors, small businesses. And I think that recognizing that there's a partnership model that can work, you can do it collaboratively without torching each other on the way through, is really key to this. And so in Vermont, I hope if nothing else, we've been a model for being collaborative at the outset. And so going forward, as we see more organizations move into MEPs and other things, which we expect in the state for different organizations working with sectors, finding ways to be collaborative, to come at it in the same spirit of partnership, and to look to what other states are doing to ensure that we're meeting the needs in the most efficient way. That's going to be the approach in Vermont. I do think that any policy set at the federal level will obviously provide incentives for probably a certain approach. When we hear about things like potential tax credits in Secure 2.0 that might be available, or other things that could incent employers to do this or others. For us, that all makes it even more attractive. And so keeping an eye on that federal policy and ensuring that the voices there are aware of what's going on at the state level, that's a priority for us. So we're really encouraged to see the movement. And it sounds like our national partners are as well. So collaboration is sort of our MO in Vermont, and we're going to keep pushing that. And so as people look around at models, hopefully we can show that our non-mandated outreach and collaborative spirit really accrues to help people meet their retirement needs.
No, well said. I guess one or two last points here, or questions, I should say. Katie, I feel like the first time that we chatted several years ago when you were, very new to CalSavers, there was a pretty steady chorus of critics just talking about how these state plans, they're not going to work. They're going to be super expensive. They don't have the same protections built in that a 401k does. It was just kind of like, one thing after another. It just seemed like everybody was coming up with all these great reasons why this was a waste of time, a waste of resources. And I don't know if there was a better solution put out there, but it seemed like there was a pretty steady diet of criticism that was kind of heading to not personally you, but just, headed your way as, as kind of the head of the CalSavers program. So how has that been? What do you hear? I personally haven't heard as much from the industry, from a lot of those critics that I think were pretty vocal several years ago. So I don't know, you're probably a little more on the front lines of that than I am. So what's it been like?
Yeah, I remember those days, Rick. You're reminding me of some tougher times. But I would agree with what you just said. It's I think it's changed. The tone has changed. And look, we're live. We've passed the deadline. We are in, approaching enforcement mode, and we're all still standing and everybody's okay still. And we've got 300,000 accounts. So I would say the general nature of the kind of criticism that remains is much more technocratic, and if that makes sense. So it's more about, can you guys, work on your payroll technology integration so it's a little quicker, so that I need a little less, customer support here, which is fine. That's great feedback, right? And we're working on that every day. And payroll technology integration is a big part of my life. So I would say that the feedback is less ideological. It's less, why do you need to exist? We don't need you. And more about, okay, we're doing this thing. Let's make it easy. Let's make it efficient. And so that's great to see. And I think also we have tried, and I've personally tried quite hard to be a broken record on that message that we're not here to compete with the industry, right? In fact, 401ks are great. 401ks are better. Please go after this market, right? Please.
You win the conversation.
Yeah, exactly. So, put us out of business, that'd be great. So, and then of course there's all the legal stuff, which, I'm not allowed to talk about, but so there's, other than to say that we're winning. So that's good. But, thanks for indulging me that. But, so it's, I would say it's kind of shrunk down, and it's more technical in nature, and we're happy to engage with that feedback because it's fair, and, I think it's kind of, undeniable, the results so far, right? Folks saving for the first time in their lives and building their financial futures. And we're really just beginning, right? There's, if you look at our hopes for the future, I think we're going to make, we're setting out to make history here. So, I would agree with you, Rick. The tone has changed quite a lot.
Yeah, and maybe one thing that I've heard that I still don't really have my arms around is, and I'm sure this varies by state and everything else, but with people having more money set aside, does that then potentially say, all right, well, you've been saving in CalSavers, or Vermont, whatever, and now you've met certain asset thresholds and you're no longer eligible for state aid? Is that a real objection? Is that a real this is an issue that could, that people might kind of down the road be like, oh wow, crap, this is something that I didn't think about, or something that nobody told me about on the front end. And I don't know. I mean, I feel like that's one thing that I've heard. That a lot of the other stuff that you've talked about, like, I get it. I mean, I think but that's the one that I haven't quite gotten my head around yet, which is, where is that? The balance between, okay, I've got some money set aside for retirement versus I'm potentially now either knowingly or unknowingly missing out on some form of aid that I might otherwise have been eligible for.
Yeah, though that's a very legitimate question. It's a really worthy topic. We've been studying it. And it's a lot more complicated than I think any of us thought at the outset. Dylan, I don't know what you've found out on this, but we've started to take a very deep dive on this. And the answer is essentially it's not, it doesn't appear to be the problem that some advocates thought it might be at the beginning. That said, there are a couple of bills actually running in California right now specifically for like the Medi-Cal asset test, to change that to exempt, CalSavers and other retirement assets from those tests. And those would all be very good things. And I think, being in California, I think they have a lot of support. But so it's a complicated answer. But the gist of it is that it doesn't appear to be that it will pose the problem that some of the advocates thought it would.
Got it. Okay. No, super helpful. Dylan, so I'll kind of toss you that two-part question. One, just from a critic standpoint, hey, it sounds like there's a lot of love going around in Vermont, unanimous support, tripartisan support. So maybe you don't have critics. I don't know. But then also just from a, hey, did you hear that, or sort of was that one of the things that you guys have thought through is what does this mean for any other sort of support or social safety nets that are available at a state level?
Yeah, well, Rick, we definitely do have critics. None of them are about our cheese or our maple syrup. There's consensus that that is very good. And I encourage you to try it if you haven't. No, but certainly, I mean, in all seriousness, there's a robust policy conversation that is ongoing and to be had around asset tests, benefit cliffs, and so forth. And we look at this quite a bit in eligibility for other services in our human services system, healthcare subsidies, and otherwise. And certainly, as we've approached things like our ABLE savings program and looked at the way that some of the policy changes at the federal and state levels have actually allowed people to save without tax consequences or eligibility being curtailed for services, I think that there will be a longer term national and state conversation about how these types of assets should be treated. You know, from my perspective as a financial literacy advocate, if we want people to build assets, if we want them to have wealth, if we want them to be able to retire with dignity, then finding ways to ensure that they don't lose some of the basic protections that they need. Maybe it's at an earlier stage in life or at an unpredictable moment is really foundational to that. And so I think that retirement policy, as it's built nationally and at the state level, we ought to be looking for ways to make it easier to save. And I know there's a broad commitment to that. It's really a question of how do you do it? Which policy lever do you pull? So I do expect there will be more state action on that in Vermont and in other states as well.
Awesome. Well, you guys have shared a ton of info. I'm just going to give you kind of each an opportunity here just to either maybe share something that we didn't talk about that you hoped we would have, or just if you have any sort of advice for each other or advice for others out there in the community that might be looking at state-run retirement plans or otherwise kind of looking to engage with yours or other state-run plans that are out there. So, Dylan, maybe have you go first, and then I'll let Katie close us out.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I would just say that as I look around at the states that are making progress in this area, even if there is resistance at the front end to some of the ideas, they win people over by results. And I think California is a great example of that. So as you look around, if you're either in this field, if you're looking at the policy, if you're trying to get a sense of trends, look around at what other states are doing. And I think you can just recognize by the growth trend alone, both in terms of states adopting plans, but also the assets that are being built, that this is an emerging sector. It's there for a public good. It's going to be there going into the future. And so there's an opportunity here to really learn from what the public programs are doing, to recognize that they play a role that is significant alongside other plans as well, and that this will continue to be an area of growth. So I would just say, look around at what's out there. It's amazing, the variety. And I expect with more plans, MEPs and PEPs coming online, and who knows what's next, that we'll see a lot of innovation. So I just want to, thank Katie for all of her work, for California's work. It's inspiring. And I think that we have a lot that we can learn from Katie's team. So we'll be looking to them as well. So, you can't do it alone. And it's great. The states really are the laboratory of democracy. So we are watching what others are doing, and folks can always get in touch if they want to hear about what Vermont's doing.
Awesome. Katie?
Yeah, well, thank you, Dylan, for those kind words. And we are definitely cheering you guys on in Vermont, and can't wait to see how it rolls out. And you are so wise to focus on all the outreach work and the education work that you're going to have to do. We have to do a ton of that too. So, and even with the mandate. So it's, the shoe leather approach is a big part of it, or whatever the Zoom equivalent of shoe leather is. But so yeah, smart to get ready for that. Just a couple of other notes, Rick, for your audience. I would say, to the extent that it's fun these days to pour over all the data and some of the numbers that I threw out today, that's all public on our website. So if you or your audience ever wants to nerd out and look at our progress, it's treasurer.ca.gov. And you can see in the quick links, all of our monthly data participation is up there. So we welcome you all to come enjoy the ride with us. But then, just another kind of note to your audience, Rick, I guess, my understanding is that your audience is really, quite an important set of stakeholders in this space, even if they're not direct, employers that are going to be subject to our mandate, or advisors to employers that are going to be subject to our mandate. but they are influencers in this space. And so I would just make a shameless appeal to them. If they could help us spread the word about the existence of our programs, we would really appreciate it. They're important influencers. They have access to networks and to friends and neighbors and colleagues who will be affected by these programs and by our mandates. So, we have a tiny little skinny shoestring budget for marketing and outreach. So we try to leverage and maximize and magnify that by doing good stakeholder work. So just a plea for them to help us spread the word. We would really appreciate it.
Awesome. There you go. Plea made. And I will include the link to those stats in the podcast notes as well. So thank you both for taking the time. Katie, great to see you again. Dylan, nice to meet you, and really great info you shared. Really enjoyed kind of the compare contrast between your two programs, and I know I learned a lot. So hopefully that means that everyone else listening did as well. So until next time, and until we tackle this topic again, I wish you guys all the best and all the best in 2021 with the progression of each of your plans. So thanks for being here again.
Thanks, Rick.
Thanks, Rick.
And there you have it, Katie Selenski and Dylan Giambatista from CalSavers and the Green Mountain Secure Retirement Plan. Loved the back and forth and compare contrast. That was super helpful. Also, we'll be very interested to see how things go for Vermont. I think it's unique and compelling that they decided to go down the path of a multiple employer plan. Also, the more kind of voluntary approach there versus the mandate. I think that brings a little different thinking. So we'll see how that goes for them. Certainly wish them all the best. Coming up on the podcast, we have a great conversation with Rob Arnott. This is his, I think, fourth time joining me, and as usual, does not disappoint with his thoughts on what's going on in the market and potentially where we go from here. Also going to be welcoming back Josh Deutsch with T. Rowe Price. He's got some really interesting research and thoughts on student loans. So with that being in the headlines, thought that would be another great topic to revisit. If you have ideas for future topics, please reach out and let me know. Best way to do that is to send me an email to feedback@401kfridays.com, whether that's a guest or a topic or a question that you have. We can research it and take it from there. Any and all ideas are always appreciated. That's it for now. Until next time, I hope you make your Friday a 401k Friday. And now, for some disclosures. The content in this podcast is provided for educational and discussion purposes only. Investing involves risk, including a potential loss of investment. Lockton does not and cannot guarantee the future performance or specific level of performance, the success of any investment, or success of any strategy. Nothing contained herein may be construed as investment or legal advice.